Alright guys, this week's video is a video that I've probably overlooked doing. I've done a couple of things about this, but it's probably one of the most overlooked things for more anglers when they're getting into bait casting, and that is how to properly set up a bait cast reel. And yes, I know there's a ton of you that know how to do this and are very successful using bait casters, but for everybody who's new at this or continues to have problems with a bait casting reel like this one, where you get the professional overrun, the bird's nest, whatever you want to call it, I'm going to go through all the setup that you have to go through with a bait caster. I know it seems basic, but let's just go through this. So a bait caster, the problem with it is there's a thumb bar that free spools for you, but the problem is when you're casting, this spins freely, and when your bait lands on the water, it continues to spin, so you get taught something that people say is feathering with your thumb. You got to feather the spool as it goes out with your thumb, and then stop it right before it hits the water. But what are the basic setups to make it easy to cast? A bait caster I'm going to break down into the 4 major areas. The big star under the handle, okay, that is the drag. The knob behind the drag is probably the most important one, and that is the spool tensioner. So when you roll it forward, it tightens the tension on the spool. When you roll it back, it loosens it. That is going to control the overrun better than almost everything. In the back, your thumb bar is right there. That free spools it. So that disengages the clutch and lets the spool free spool. At that point, if you let go of it, your bait will drop. So that's where your thumb comes in. The last part is the other side. Now, depending what you're using for a bait cast reel, it could have a dial with 0 to 10 or 0 to 6 on it, and it could be magnetic braking. And then traditional Shimanos, the originals, have what we call VBS or variable braking, where when you open them up, you'll notice there's a bunch of pins there. Okay, those pins, much like what you see here, flap up and down or in and out on a cylinder. And what they are, as I call them, they're like parachutes. The beautiful part about this type of system is the fact that it only really activates when you need it most, and that is at the height of the speed of a cast. So when you first cast and your spool speed is going the fastest, these little parachutes flare outward and they control the overrun. They control the spool from going faster than the bait is. As the bait starts to slow down, they start to retract. It's just centrifugal force that pulls them out and lets them set back in. And the nice thing is when you're reeling, they really aren't on because they're not spinning overly fast. The problem with this system is if you've got a traditional VBS system, you have to take your side plate off to adjust them. And to adjust them, it's pretty simple. They click up and lock in. That is them being off or not helping you at all. When they're down and they're loose where they flap up and down, they're active. So they're gonna flare when you cast, they're gonna retract when they're not being used. The other part is with the other style of VBS braking where it's on a pin, you click it up, and if the pin moves up and down the plastic tip, then that tells you it's active. If you clip it down and it's stuck down, it's off. So on this system here, this is a Corrado MGL70. This has got the SVS Infinity braking, which is VBS on the inside with one difference. You can fine tune this one with a dial on the outside. Very simply is it's got a knob that goes from 1 to 6. 1 being the least amount of controls, 6 being the most amount of control. And it allows them to stay stuck in their position where they're gonna help you the most. So again, 1, least amount of control, so further casting distance, but more risk of an overrun. Number 6, the most amount of control, so it's gonna keep them open and active. Now, the beauty of that is you no longer have to take off your side plate. If you set your reel up with 2 brakes on, 2 brakes off, which most come out of the factory that way, your adjustments happen on the outside. Biggest thing I tell people, if you're new, one of the tricks I tell everybody is, if you've never done it before, take out 30, 40, 50 feet of line. Stretch your bait out there, place a small piece of electrical tape on the spool, and then reel your line over it. And what that's gonna do is as you're casting, if you happen to get a bird's nest or a professional overrun, the tape is gonna stop it from going too far down into the spool. And as you graduate and begin to get better and better at casting and continually can hit the tape, you can peel the tape off, pull another 10 or 15 feet of line out, put the tape back on. It's just a safety net so that when you get a bad one by spiking the bait into the floor or you cast into the wind, it's not gonna ruin the entire spool of line. When you set it up, spool tensioner should always be measured by how fast your bait will fall. What I tend to do is I roll it forward all the way, my spool tensioner, so that when I open my bail, my spool will not spin with the bait attached, and I start to slowly back it off until the bait just starts to fall. Perfect spot for someone who's just getting into Baitcaster. On the other side, whether you're using magnetic, VBS, or SVS Infinity, set the brakes all on. So you want them all loose. If there's 6 on your VBS system, you want them all in the out position so they're working. If you have 4, like on an SVS Infinity system, you want all 4 moving. And then set your dial, if you have magnetic or SVS Infinity, set it to the highest number, whether it's 10 or 6. That's gonna give you the most control. There's one problem. When you do that, it's gonna sacrifice casting distance. So again, guys, please don't run before you can walk. You wanna be able to cast as far as you can comfortably and get used to the release point of a baitcaster, because that is critical. Release too early, bait goes straight up. Release too late, bait goes into the ground, giant bird's nest. When you start getting comfortable with it, with all your brakes on, set it back to 5 and start casting. Then move it to 4. Slowly work your way to the point where you're 2 on and 2 off, if you're using VBS or SVS Infinity, or you're using your dial back to number 4 or 3, or in this case 2 or 1. That's gonna get you more casting distance. But there is no backlash-free reel. DC technology is gonna help you. Microcomputer set on number 4, virtually impossible to backlash unless you spike it in the ground. Casting technique goes a long way when it comes to baitcasters. So just my little tip, broken down very simply: the spool tensioner, the thumb bar, and the adjustable braking. All of those things work together to make casting a baitcaster not that big of a deal. Don't be afraid. Go out there, practice, use the tape, save yourself the overrun. Oh, and if you're gonna pick a line to use, pick braid. It is far easier to get out than fluorocarbon, which has a lot of memory, or mono that has a lot of memory. So a heavier diameter braid to start. If you want more casting distance, then you would drop down. But 40, 50, 65 pound braid, perfect for learning how to use a baitcaster. Hopefully this helps.